Welcome to my channel of Mike the Birdman of Minnesota. I hope you're enjoying Adventures of Chris and Mike on my channel. I'm starting a new segment on our 2005 visit to the Grand Portage Fort. I hope you enjoy this glimpse into the voyagers' experience from the past.
Welcome to the Quebec Oven. Oven like this, all with wood fire, would be used by the baker. The baker here for many years was Pt.3. Came out from Montreal. He'd come with the agents in one of those express canoes. Some of our records tell us they could make it here in 19 days in an express canoe, a light canoe. But once he got here, he'd make his starter, a sourdough starter, and then he'd be overseeing all the bread baking. So while his bread's rising in the kitchen, he'd be putting a wood fire in here, and most of our wood is birch that we use today. Here, you build your fire in here, and you've gotten some wooden scrapers or hoes. They look like hoes, but they have a wooden scraper. Once you let that burn down to coals, you'd actually scrape that fire out, the coals, into a tin pan that's over there on the porch, and then you throw those coals into the ash pit right here, and then you can sweep it out a little bit, clean it out, and you can put your bread right on the floor. And then it's got a door, heavy door, goes right over it, and you can bake about 10 loaves at a time, two-pound loaves, round. And you could bake maybe twice in that oven, and then you might have to refire it again. But you wouldn't have to build as big a fire as you did in the morning because the clay top is holding the heat. So you'd have to put a smaller fire, and then you could bake a couple more times. But the baker here had to make every voyageur from the interior, which there's about 500 to 600 coming in, was guaranteed a loaf of bread out of this kitchen, part of their regale. They'd be getting whole wheat bread, and the baker would have to make all that for them. And they got butter from the kitchen. The company brings out cattle, both for milk and beef, and the farm was around this area outside the stockade somewhere. We don't know yet where it was. And so butter, and they'd get salted beef for pork. They got clothes, and they got rum and tobacco, and they'd grab their tent and head outside the stockade and set up for the camp with the bread. Probably finish the bread off pretty fast, I imagine. Every time you heat it up, it cracks a little bit. You can see some cracks developing right here. And once the cracks get too bad, they'd actually take a hammer and knock the top part down, and then they would put a frame made out of willow sticks that would be arced, and you'd put that on the floor. The bottom lasts longer because the heat, of course, rises, so the top's getting most of the heat. So the top, this one's about 4 years. Probably in the next couple years we'll have to rebuild. But the bottom will last maybe 4 or 5 ovens. So you put your frame on the bottom, and then you layer clay over maybe 6 to 8 inches thick. And the clay has some straw in it, and it's local Lake Superior clays when the lake was higher. And you let that dry a couple weeks. Your first fires are to burn out that frame. So if you look in there, you can actually see the sticks where the frame was. Over on this side especially. Maybe you can see it in there. See the stick? See the round impression in the clay? Yeah, that's... so the first fires are low fires to burn that frame out, but that also helps to dry the interior out. And then you can start building small fires to help, really dry it out. And over time it gets completely dry. And you can slip it. You can seal the cracks by layering clay on, kind of brushing on a liquid clay over to a point. But usually those cracks develop, they'll follow a straw up. Because it's got straw in it, the straw burns. It'll follow straw up, and then it'll develop a crack on the outside. You'll actually see it smoking. I think back here we had one. You can see it smoking when it's being fired. Yeah. And then the roof is really really important when it's raining because the clay would just get washed off. But just imagine firing it and you have a rain falling, then your chance of cracking it is greater.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it'd get
It's
cold
like
and hot. Yeah, it would
Trying to
crack.
fire a piece of ceramic and you got
So the
cold
roof
water
would
falling on it.
protect it.
Yeah. And actually this one is not attached, it can be moved off. So when we rebuild the top, we'll just knock it down, move this off by hand and then rebuild it. And yeah, about 4 years ago when this had to be rebuilt, the bottom, they found 2 huge cracks across this way. So the bottoms will crack too. And the first oven here, these Quebec ovens usually had a wood frame fence of horizontal beams, much like the garden, raised gardens,
Uh-huh.
and they'd fill that with sand or gravel. Well, they baked in that a couple times, and somebody missed a coal. And the
In the
coal
sand?
the next day in the logs, and the next day they came back. Logs were all gone. There was no A-frame yet built over that oven, and the Quebec top, the clay top, was sitting on the pile of gravel and sand.
Oh,
So this
no.
was the solution to replace it with rocks, which of course the rocks won't burn, but each one of those rocks expands and contracts a little bit differently, and so over time it will break apart just like a log oven will burn. Yeah, so neither world is ideal, but this works well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. They've baked during Rendezvous. They baked 2 roasts in there one year. Well, they've baked, of course, mostly on Friday. They bake the rolls, and they bake wheat bread and white bread, and they baked pumpkin pies and berry pies, all Friday during the Rendezvous event. Yeah. So
So it works like an oven and keeps the same temperature. While the coals are in. Well, the coals are out, but it's
yeah,
hot
once you
enough.
pull the coals out, the temperature drops. Only
Uh-huh.
drops. But usually, I think we've tried different things, but scones were very popular with the Scottish owners, and we've tried to bring it up to like 400 degrees, and scones bake for about 12 minutes at 400 degrees, and then once it drops, it's you pulled the coals out, it's dropping, and you can once it's 350, and you can put your bread in there a couple times, and then it might drop down. The second bake will be longer because it's cooling off.
Yeah.
So once it gets down to 300 to 275, 250, then you might have to refire it again. Yeah, but the baker was a 7-year apprenticeship to be a baker, and it was like a middle-class position at the time. Very skilled person. He'd know the size of wood and what type of wood, exactly how much heat he wanted and how much he'd get.
Music by kind permission of Dan Nestor. Stay tuned to my channel for more of our visit to the Grand Portage Fort, and please subscribe to my channel.